A poor girl, an old piano, and a dream no one believed in, until she placed her hands on the keys in front of a room full of sneering faces. No stage lights, no backing music, and no support, except from her mother, who had swallowed her tears, all her life just so she could one day stand tall and say to the world, "That's my daughter." Before we continue with Emma's remarkable journey, if you also believe that a person's true worth lies not in their circumstances or appearance, but in their relentless determination and passion, then please like and subscribe to help spread more stories like this that inspire. Now, let's return to the story, where many surprises still await. On winter mornings in a small town in Nebraska, where fog clung to school bus windows and the wind whispered through every crack in the door, a 12-year-old girl named Emma Brooks often woke up earlier than the other kids her age. Not to have breakfast or do her hair, but to help her mother, Lena, a single mom, clean the cafe where she worked before the first shift began. Their apartment was on the second floor of an old red brick building right next to the train station. The walls were stained yellow, the ceiling was marked with water spots, and the sound of passing trains at night seemed to lull them to sleep with memories from the past. In the smallest room was the most special thing of all, an upright oak piano, its paint chipped, some keys yellowed, and its tone no longer in tune. But it was the one treasure Lena kept after selling almost everything to raise her child. The piano had been the last gift from Lena's late father, a wandering musician who used to play piano at roadside diners. When Emma was very young, Lena would teach her the first notes by placing her tiny hands over her own and playing together. By ear, sweetheart. Don't memorize notes. Feel them with your heart. And so Emma learned to play the piano the same way she learned to speak, without textbooks or lessons, just nights spent side by side under the soft glow of a yellow lamp, playing an old song her grandfather once played for Lena, now passed on to his granddaughter. Emma never had formal music training, but there was something about the way she touched the keys that made people hesitate to interrupt. She didn't play fast or loud, but every melody that came from her small hands seemed to whisper a story about blackout nights, about the times her mother held her close when the apartment was too cold, or about rainy afternoons when they shared a single bowl of instant noodles. At school, Emma didn't have many friends. Her brown hair was always neatly tied back, her jacket was patched all over, and her shoes were so worn out they had nearly lost their shape. But nothing hurt her more than the looks of pity, because as long as she could play the piano, she could forget everything else. One time, after finishing a chore cleaning tables in the school library in exchange for a free lunch, Emma asked the librarian if she could stay a little longer. In the corner of the room sat an old dusty piano. No one played it anymore. Its strings were loose and its keys creaked, but to Emma it was a treasure. She opened the lid and tested a few keys, off-pitch, discordant. But her eyes lit up as if she had just found a long-lost friend. She began to play, not for an audience, not for applause, and not even for practice, just melody and memory. At the same time, back home, Lena was mending her daughter's old school shirt. She paused and looked up at a faded photo of her father, smiling, fingers resting gently on piano keys, eyes distant. "Dad," she whispered, "I hope wherever you are, you're hearing your granddaughter's music." To most, a piano is just an instrument, but for Emma and her mother, it was their private language, for love, for remembrance, and for staying grounded through life's storms. Emma didn't dream of stage lights or standing ovations. She only hoped that every time her fingers touched the keys, her mother might forget her exhaustion, her grandfather might smile from somewhere far away, and she herself might feel like she belonged, even if just for 3 minutes of a sad song. That week, Millstone Elementary School posted a big announcement right on the main bulletin board. "Welcome to Talent Week. Artistic performances, music, dance, short skits, all are welcome. Sign up at the office by Wednesday." The schoolyard buzzed like a broken beehive. Groups of close friends clustered together, excitedly planning their acts. Some promised to cover the latest TikTok hit. Others showed off sparkly dance costumes their moms had just bought. Meanwhile, Emma quietly walked alone, her old backpack sagging off one shoulder, clutching a music notebook her mother had handwritten for her. When the recess bell rang, she stood in front of the sign-up sheet, holding a worn-down pencil. For a long time, the last line was still blank. She knew that once she wrote her name down, there would be no turning back. And then she wrote, Emma Brooks, piano, Clair de Lune, Debussy. Her handwriting was small and slanted. As soon as she finished, laughter erupted behind her. Emma? Performing piano? Wait, does anyone even know that poor girl has a piano? She's probably bringing one of those toy pianos from McDonald's. The laughter burst out sharp and loud. Some even took pictures of the sign-up sheet to share in their group chats, adding rolling on the floor laughing emojis. But Emma just lowered her head, gripped her music notebook tightly, and quietly returned to class. No response. No yours? That evening, in their tiny apartment, Lena was reheating a pot of vegetable soup when she noticed her daughter sitting in front of the piano, not playing, just staring at the faded white keys. Did something happen at school, sweetheart? Emma hesitated for a moment, then sighed. They said I'll make a fool of myself if I perform. And do you believe that? I'm not sure. Lena sat beside her and placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. You know, I used to play that very piece when I was your age. Grandpa taught me every note. Every time I played it, it felt like I was telling his life story. You chose that piece not to earn applause, but to tell a story. The story of us, of you, me, and your grandfather. If you tell it with all your heart, no one will be able to laugh. Emma looked up at her mother, eyes full of doubt but deep and searching. You'll come, right? Even if I have to skip the whole morning shift. From that day on, Emma practiced every night, even though the old piano had a few off-key notes, even though the sound of passing trains outside the window sometimes drowned her out. She persisted. Each section of music slowly became more fluid, more complete. Not perfect, but carrying a tender feeling, as if she were rewriting her mother's dream using her own fingers. The day of the performance arrived. Millstone's assembly. Hall was decorated with balloons and twinkling lights. A small stage had been set up with wooden planks, and in front of it were 3 rows of folding chairs. Students, parents, and a few teachers filled every seat. Lena arrived early, wearing a well-ironed but worn-out white blouse, holding a bouquet of wild daisies she had picked by the roadside. The performances went on one by one. A K-pop dance group with vibrant lights, a boy magician turning paper into flowers, and a girl singing pop songs with a wireless microphone. The audience cheered and clapped, camera flashes going off constantly. Emma sat in the waiting row backstage, alone. A few students glanced at her and snickered. One held up their phone, ready to record a video. For fun, her name was called. The MC's voice sounded slightly reluctant. And next we have a piano solo, Clair de Lune, performed by Emma Brooks. A few scattered claps, a few stifled giggles. Emma walked out. No colored lights, no backing track, just the old library. Piano wheeled onto the stage. Its dust had been wiped away, and in front of her was a sea of faces dimly lit under the spotlight, expressions still unreadable. Emma sat down on the bench, back straight, her small hands resting gently on the yellowed piano keys. The stage light cast a long shadow of her across the wooden floor. Below, the murmurs hadn't completely died down. A few small laughs, some whispered comments. What's she even gonna play? Probably hit the wrong keys and cry. But Emma didn't look down. She closed her eyes. In that moment, she was no longer at Millstone Elementary's auditorium. She was in her tiny room at home beside her mother. The cold wind seeped through the window cracks. The distant sound of a train horn echoed faintly, and her mom, Lena, was gently nodding, smiling. Her eyes shadowed by exhaustion from back-to-back shifts, yet always as tender as a candle burning. Silently, Emma took a deep breath, and then her hands began to move. No backing track, no microphone, No one keeping rhythm, just the first notes of Clair de Lune rising, soft as morning mist settling over a still lake. The old piano creaked, slightly, but the sound lingered. Each note flowed out like a whisper, something deeply personal, intimately familiar yet long forgotten. At first the room didn't quite pay attention. A few kids shifted in their seats. A mother quickly sent a text. But then, as if an invisible hand had drawn back a veil, silence began to spread. Not the silence of boredom, but the kind that only falls when people are afraid to interrupt something sacred. A music teacher who had been taking notes looked up. Her pen fell from her hand. Without her noticing, an older parent in the front row took off his glasses, wiped the lenses with his sleeve but didn't put them back on. His eyes were red. The piece continued. Its transitions soared like dreams taking flight, then descended like tender memories brushing the heart. And the one playing this piece was a girl without a private tutor, without a sparkly costume, with no one cheering her on except the mother sitting in the very last row, clutching a bouquet of wild daisies, like she was holding the last warmth of her youth. Emma still had her eyes closed. She wasn't performing. She had become part of the music. When the final note rang out like a breeze passing through, gentle, soft, the entire auditorium remained silent. 1 second, 2, then 3, and then the first round of applause came from the last person anyone expected. The principal, known for her strictness, stood and clapped. Then came a teacher, then a senior student, then the entire hall. No one cheered, no one whistled, just steady, respectful clapping, as if every clap was a silent apology, a thank you, an acknowledgement. Emma sat still. Her hands were trembling slightly, but when she opened her eyes, they were calm, the eyes of someone who had just shed an invisible burden. In the audience, Lena stood up. She didn't clap. She simply stood there, one hand over her heart, her eyes never leaving her daughter. Her face was soaked with tears, but her smile was as radiant as the first light of spring. Emma walked off the stage, down a narrow hallway that led behind the auditorium. There, she leaned against the wall, hands clutching her mother's music notebook. No one was waiting. No flash photography, no interviews, just a quiet moment where she knew she hadn't lost herself. She hadn't been afraid. She had told the story of her mother, her grandfather, and herself in a language that needed no words. A soft sound came from behind. Emma turned around. It was an elderly woman with silver hair, a long blue-gray coat, and a small name badge. She stepped forward, her eyes both warm and sharp. "You must be Emma, right? I'm Margaret Ellis, director of the Windmir Academy of Music's talent program. Came to see my daughter's performance earlier, but you are the reason I stayed." Emma's eyes widened. Before she could respond, Margaret continued, gently but firmly. "Have you ever thought about studying music seriously?" Emma stood still, her heart pounding. She looked up at the woman who had called her name, Mrs. Margaret Ellis, director of the talent program at Windmir Academy of Music, a well-known institution in the region where gifted children were trained. To step onto grand stages, Emma had never imagined she'd be having a conversation like this. I don't have a teacher. I can't really read sheet music very well," Emma said quietly, her voice hesitant. Mrs. Margaret smiled, not at all surprised. "I know. That's exactly why I stayed. Sometimes what we're looking for isn't found in sheet music or technique, but in the heart. And you have that, something many people lose while chasing perfection." At that moment, Lena had just arrived backstage, hesitantly watching. She hadn't yet grasped what was happening when Mrs. Margaret turned and greeted her. "Hello, I'm Margaret Ellis. Your daughter has something very rare, the ability to tell stories through music." Lena was speechless. She gently squeezed Emma's hand, as if to confirm that she was awake. After a few minutes of conversation, Mrs. Margaret invited Emma to visit the academy for an official audition the following Saturday. They had a special scholarship program for students from difficult circumstances, but with outstanding musical potential. No need to prepare much. Just come and play the piece you love most, Mrs. Margaret said before leaving. That evening, in their small apartment, Emma and her mother sat across from each other in the kitchen corner. The pot of vegetable soup was still steaming, but no one ate. Lena quietly looked at her daughter, then gently asked, "Do you want to go?" Emma nodded. "I want to try, Mom, even if it's just once." And so on Saturday, the two of them caught the earliest bus carrying an old music notebook, a bag of homemade sandwiches, and a fragile mix of hope and nervous anticipation pulsing with every heartbeat. Windmir Academy was located on the northern edge of a large town, its grounds wide and open, with a curved wrought iron gate and a polished brass nameplate. Emma stepped through the gate feeling as if her heart had dropped into her stomach. Inside was a completely different world. Children wearing white shirts and name badges, some tuning violins, others doing vocal warm-ups with instructors. Emma felt small. Mrs. Margaret welcomed them in the main hall and led Emma into a soundproof room, the audition space, with a grand piano bathed in soft light at the center. The only people in the room were Mrs. Margaret, a recording technician, and Emma. "You can play any piece you love," she said gently. Emma took a breath, then sat down. This grand piano was much newer than the old upright at home, but the black and white keys were still familiar friends. And then she began to play, not Clair de Lune as at the school performance, but a piece she had composed herself, Rain and Light. It was a melody she had imagined during rainy afternoons, when she and her mother sat by the window eating instant noodles, watching the water stream along the streets. Each piano key rang out slowly, delicately, nothing flashy, but every note painted a scene. The sound of falling rain, the smell of vegetable soup, the hum of her mother's sewing, the warm yellow light cast across the table. The entire room fell silent. When the final note drifted out like a soft sigh, Mrs. Margaret remained still, eyes gently closed. "You've never studied composition?" "No, ma'am. I just play what I remember and feel," Emma replied. Mrs. Margaret turned to the technician. "Send this recording to the board. Note, untrained applicant, but with raw musical ability." As mother and daughter were preparing to leave the academy, Lena suddenly paused. "Excuse me, but if, say, Emma was accepted, I won't be able to afford everything. Bus fare, lodging, books." Mrs. Margaret looked at her for a long moment, then smiled. "If Emma is the reason she plays the way she does, then I believe this academy would be honored to welcome both of you." Emma officially entered the gates of Windmir Academy at the start of autumn, when the trees were turning bronze and the air carried the faint scent of damp wood. In her left hand, she pulled a worn fabric suitcase. In her right, Lena carried a bag filled with dry food, towels, and a music notebook, their most precious possession. The school had a dormitory wing for scholarship students. Emma's room was on the second floor, small but spotless. A crisp white bed, a window opening to a garden full of maple trees. Everything felt too new, too quiet, and too unfamiliar. Her first class was vocal anatomy and sound technique. The teacher handed out color-printed materials, diagrams of the larynx, voice-type classifications, how to use the diaphragm. Emma looked at the illustrations and saw what felt like advanced biology, unfamiliar, confusing. She leaned over and asked her seatmate quietly, "Do we have to memorize all this?" The girl glanced at her and shrugged. "You've never learned this before? That's weird. I've been studying this since 3rd grade." In sight reading class, Emma struggled with reading sheet music. The symbols, rests, ties, what her peers treated like a second language, were a maze to her. She played by instinct, by ear, by reflex. But the teacher reminded her, "You've got natural talent, but you also need to learn how to understand music, not just feel it." At lunch in the cafeteria, the other students chatted about Chopin, Liszt, about Level 8 piano curricula, about past performances in New York and Chicago. Emma sat quietly, her lunch wrapped in cloth by her mom. No fancy lunchbox, No organic. Juice. A group of first-year students whispered behind her, "That's Emma, the girl who played Clair de Lune at a public school last month. Yeah, my mom showed me the clip. She was good but like rustic, not trained." That night, Emma sat alone on a bench behind the dormitory. The scent of wet grass lingered. The sounds of polished piano playing drifted from practice rooms. Precise, dazzling, as if from another world. She opened her old music notebook. On the first page was a line her mother had written in blue ink. "Music is what you haven't found the words to say. Speak with your heart, my love." A deep voice spoke. Out late and not sleeping, Emma turned around. It was Mr. Oliver, the composition teacher. In his 50s with salt and pepper hair, he always wore a wool scarf even when the weather didn't call for it. He sat down beside her. "I used to be a scholarship student here too, from a little lakeside town. Back then, I didn't know anything about notation either. Reading music felt like reading a foreign language." Emma gave a small smile. He continued, "But I had this one thing. Every time I played, I remembered my grandmother. She was the first to let me hear music through an old radio with almost dead batteries. That was real music. No technique can teach you that kind of feeling." Emma stayed quiet. Her hand still rested on her notebook. "At the end of this semester," he said, "you'll each perform a piece you've chosen, not for a grade, but to say, 'This is me.'" "Can I choose someone else's piece?" she asked. "Of course, but if you really want people to remember, pick something only you can tell." Emma nodded slightly. That night she reopened the piece she once played in the living room, "Rain and Light." She began to write it down, truly write it, not just hold it in her mind. For the first time she used 5-line staffs, wrote notes, made revisions, and recalled the rhythm of her mother's claps when she was little. Windmir Academy's end-of-semester recital took place on a gentle Friday afternoon, when the maple leaves had fully turned gold and red, and the late autumn sunlight streamed through the theater windows like streaks of memory. Willow Hall, the Academy's old wooden concert hall, glowed under warm lights. The audience seats quickly filled with parents, teachers, and even some unfamiliar faces, talent scouts, local music journalists, and notable alumni. Each held a small printed program listing every performance by name. Number 17, Emma Brooks. "Rain and Light," original composition. Lena sat in the third row near the aisle, clutching a fabric handbag that held a handkerchief embroidered with her daughter's name. She didn't bring flowers nor a phone to record, only the trembling heart of a mother who had given up her youth, now watching her child's small dream begin to bloom. Before Emma came a series of showstoppers. A Beethoven sonata performed. At breakneck speed, a violin act intertwined with modern dance. A dazzling Broadway number complete with lights and color. Then, the MC's voice echoed. And next, an original piece from a first-year student. Please welcome Emma Brooks with "Rain and Light." No spotlight, no confetti, just a girl with neatly tied hair, wearing a light blue dress and a tiny sun pendant, a birthday gift from her mother years ago, walking to the center of the stage. Emma sat at the piano, her hands resting on the keys. Warm light softly lit her face. In that moment, all other sounds seemed to vanish. And then, the first notes rang out. The melody wasn't fast, it wasn't complex, but every note carried something deep, like the sound of light rain on a tin roof, sunlight slipping through curtains, the smell of vegetable soup on a cold day, and the feeling of her mother's hand when they had nothing but each other. Rain and Light was a story no one else but Emma could tell, and the audience understood that. A music professor put down her pen. An elderly man in the back row placed a hand over his chest. Eliza, the girl who had once ignored Emma on their first day, watched intently, eyes brimming, whispering to her roommate, I didn't think I'd get emotional." And when the final note echoed, lingering like the last drop of dew falling from a leaf, the hall remained silent. A silence too sacred to break with rushed applause. Then the first clap came, from Lena. She didn't stand. She simply clapped, slowly, eyes wet with tears, still holding the hand-stitched handkerchief, and after that, the entire auditorium joined in. Emma bowed, but this time she didn't tremble. She didn't drop her gaze. She looked straight toward the third row, where her mother's eyes were waiting, and in them there was no more worry, only pride. The next morning, as Emma and her mother were having breakfast at a small cafe just outside the school gate, Mr. Oliver walked in carrying an envelope. He set it down on the table. "Congratulations, the board held an emergency meeting this morning." Lena opened the letter. Clear, printed words. "We are honored to grant a full official scholarship to student Emma Brooks. In addition, Windmir Academy warmly invites Ms. Lena Brooks to serve as music library coordinator, beginning next term." Lena was speechless. Emma whispered, "Mom, I get to stay with you." Years later, when Emma became a composer and was invited back as an honorary faculty member, a journalist asked her, "What was the turning point in your career?" Emma smiled. "My very first recital, in an old wooden hall with a grand piano, and just one person who stood up to clap first. That person was my mother, and I played a piece I had never said out loud in my entire life." And so the journey of Emma Brooks came to a close. From an old piano in a tiny apartment to a concert hall filled with tearful eyes. From cruel laughter to applause no one would forget. If this story touched you in some quiet moment, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe so we can keep honoring kindness, authenticity, and inspiration in a world that's moving ever faster. See you in the next story.